Hi everyone. So in this video I'm going to be talking about the book The Little Prince that goes along with the tarot deck The Little Prince. Love this deck. It's a beautiful deck. Artwork is very well done, watercolor. But I wanted to understand the deck more because there are some images that are perplexing. But after you read this book, which you can get at the library, I get this one at the library. It's only about 144 pages. But it's a children's book, but it's also good for adults. It's poignant. It speaks of many, moral lessons, but as well, it's a bit spooky, the whole story behind it. It's basically a pilot crashes his plane in the middle of the desert, and he meets this little prince from a faraway planet and learns some lessons through him. And at the end, the prince basically dies. Although they don't say it directly. They say he goes back home to his planet. So there's a lot of serious themes to this, and I find it very well written. It's no wonder this is a classic. So anyways, and what's interesting is the author, I'm going to say his name, he's a French author, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. He published, this book was first published in 1943. And again, he was an airline pilot. So after the book was published, a year later, he died in a plane crash, it's believed. He was never found again. It was during World War II. He was flying in occupied France, and he never returned. So, and he did, in fact, over his years of being a pilot, he did crash his plane into the Libyan desert at one point, and he had to walk for 3 days without water to get help. And this book starts off with a pilot crashing his plane in the desert, and that's where he meets the prince. So maybe he really met a prince when he was in the Libyan desert and crashed. I don't know. But so it starts off with, now this book is written, the whole theme of the book is, how silly adults are. They don't pay attention to the important things like that children know. So he starts off with a story about how he drew a picture and showed it to the grown-ups, and they thought it was a hat, but it's actually a snake that swallowed, a boa constrictor that swallowed his prey there. Oh, an elephant. So then he had to draw it again with the elephant, showing the elephant inside. So he starts off saying how silly adults are. They can't tell that's a boa, they can't tell that this is a boa, constrictor with an elephant inside, right? So it's very cute, very interesting. So whenever I encountered a grown-up who seemed to me at all enlightened, I would experiment on him with my drawing number 1, which I've always kept, and I wanted to see if he really understood anything. But he would always answer, "It's a hat," and then I wouldn't talk about boa constrictors or jungles or stars. So he said, so I lived alone without anyone I could really talk to until I had to make a crash landing in the Sahara deserts. So the first night he went to sleep 1,000 miles away from any inhabited country, more isolated than a man in a shipwreck. Excuse me. So you can imagine my surprise when I was awakened at daybreak by a funny little voice saying, "Please draw me a sheep." I'm not going to read the whole book. I'm just going to read certain parts. So this is when he meets the little prince. So the first thing the little prince says to him is, "Draw me a sheep." So he said he stared wild-eyed at his apparition, like, who is this person? And then he repeated slowly, "Draw me a sheep." So he complied and drew a sheep for the little prince here. And he shows some examples of the way he drew it. And the little prince said, no, I want... He said, no, I don't want an elephant inside a boa constrictor. A boa constrictor is very dangerous. An elephant would get in the way. Where I live, everything is very small. I need a sheep. Draw me a sheep. And then here, okay, so patiently I was in a hurry to start working on my engine, right, because this plane just crashed. So he said, I scribbled the drawing and added, "This is just the crate. The sheep you want is inside." So he tried to draw the sheep. He didn't like any of his sheep. So then he said, okay, here's the crate. So remember this picture here because this is in the tarot deck. So this is the crate. Because the little prince didn't like any of his sheep drawings, he said, okay, here's the box, the sheep's inside. Here's the crate. There you go. Your sheep's in there. Yeah, and then the little prince said, "That's just what I wanted. It's the just kind of sheep I wanted." And the little prince said, "Where I live, everything is very small." And, yeah, so that's how he met the little prince. So it took some time for him to understand where the little prince came from. He was very vague about answering any questions. So it says, though he had the first clue to the mystery of his presence, he asked him, "Do you come from another planet?" But he made no answer. He shook his head a little, still staring at his airplane, at the author's airplane. Of course, that couldn't have brought you very far. And he fell into a reverie that lasted a long time. Then, taking my sheep out of his pocket, he plunged into contemplation of his treasure. So he came from another planet. And then how he learned a very second important thing was that the planet he came from was hardly bigger than a house. So it was a very, very small planet. And it goes into like how it has a number, like an asteroid. Asteroids have numbers there. And so asteroid B612, and it kind of grown-ups like numbers. It says, and when you tell them about a new friend, they never ask questions about what really matters. They never ask, what does his voice sound like? What games does he like best? Does he collect butterflies? No. They ask, how old is he? And how many brothers does he have? And how much does he weigh? And how much money does his father make? Oh, my goodness. So he's going into the difference between adults, children here. From a young person's perspective, the silly adults, yeah. So if you tell them the proof of the little prince's existence is that he was very delightful, he laughed, and that he wanted a sheep. When someone wants a sheep, that proves he exists. They shrug their shoulders and treat you like a child. You must not hold it against them. Children should be very understanding of grown-ups. Once upon a time, there was a little prince who lived on a planet hardly any bigger than he was, and he needed a friend. So the fact is, these memories, he's saying this, so the author's saying these memories are painful for him. It's been 6 years since he saw his friend, the little prince, so he's trying to describe them here. They said it's sad to forget about a friend. Not everyone has had a friend, and I might become like the grown-ups who are no longer interested in anything but numbers. So the little prince, let me see here. Saying he's not too tall, not too short. Didn't explain anything. So every day he'd learn something about the little prince's planet, about his departure, and about his journey. It would come quite gradually in the course of his remarks. That's how he learned the third day about baobabs. So apparently the little prince had, on his little planet, he had to uproot the baobab trees as they started to grow, the seedlings, because if they were allowed to grow to their full size, they would get too big and they would take over the entire planet, as the picture shows. So one of the jobs of the little prince on his little planet was to uproot and weed out the baobab trees. And then he says the sheep could eat the baobabs. Said, in fact, on the little prince's planet, as on all planets, good plants and bad plants. The good plants come from good seeds, and the bad plants come from the bad seeds. But the seeds are invisible. They sleep in secrecy of the ground until one of them decides to wake up. So then they go into... Yeah, so he has to stop the baobab trees from overgrowing the planet. And then so every day is discipline. The little prince on his planet would say, when you finish washing and dressing each morning, you must tend to your planet. You must be sure you pull up the baobabs regularly, as you can tell them apart from the rose bushes, which are closely resemble them when very young. It's very tedious work, but very easy. And one day he advised me to do my best to make a beautiful drawing of the edification of children where I live. Okay. So following the little prince's instructions, he drawn the planet, danger of the baobabs. Says, children, watch out for baobabs. Is to warn my friends of the danger of which they, like myself, have long been unaware. That's when he drew this drawing, I guess. So he gradually came to understand the little prince. For a time, his only entertainment was the pleasure of sunsets. On the fourth day, he told him how he really liked sunsets. And at first, he seemed quite surprised. He said, he's talking about how small the planet is. He says, one day I saw sunset 45 times. On a tiny planet, all you have to do is move your chair a few feet, and you watch the twilight whenever you want to. So you can watch the sunset whenever he wants on this little planet. Just have to move his seat. So he once saw 44 times in one day. On the fifth day, thanks to the sheep, another secret of the little prince's life was revealed. The prince asked him if it were the fruit of a problem long pondered in silence. If sheep eat bushes, do they eat flowers too? So he tells him, of course, the sheep would eat flowers, and the little prince was worried. He looked quite worried about that. And he said, what about the thorns? And he explained the thorns don't help. And the prince got very upset. And the little prince lashed out at him with a sort of bitterness and said, I don't believe you. Flowers are weak. Anyway, he said, the little prince never let go of a question once he asked it. I was annoyed. So he was working on his plane, and the little prince is asking him questions. And the little prince asked him, what good are thorns on the flower? And he answered the little prince, they're not good for anything. They're just flowers. And then the little prince lashed out at him and said, I don't believe you. Flowers are weak. They're naive. They reassure themselves whatever they can. They reassure themselves whatever way they can. They believe their thorns make them frightening. So basically, Little Prince has a little flower on his planet that he loves. And he has a relationship. They talk to each other. It's like not a romantic relationship. He cares for the flower. It's his flower, and he worries about it. So he gets upset when the author's, the pilot in this story says, oh, it's just a flower, right? So this is very important in the tarot deck because in the Lover's card is the little boy with his flower. So you begin to understand there's a relationship here. He loves his flower. It's him and his flower alone, basically on his planet there. Very unique flower. So on the Little Prince's planet has always been very simple flowers decorated with a single row, and then he met this rose that grew. And the Little Prince was like, how lovely you are. And the Little Prince, now talking about the flower here, Little Prince with his flower. So the Little Prince realized that she wasn't any way modest, but she was dazzling. I believe it's breakfast time, she soon added. Would you be so kind as to tend to me? And the Little Prince, utterly abashed, having gone to look for watering cans, served the flower. So she had soon begun tormenting him with her rather touchy vanity. One day, for instance, alluding to her 4 thorns, she remarked to her Little Prince, I'm ready for tigers and all their claws. And the Little Prince told her there are no tigers on this planet. And besides, tigers don't eat weeds. And she said, I'm not a weed, the flower replied. And he said, forgive me. And she says, I'm not at all afraid of tigers, but I have a horror of giraffes. You wouldn't happen to have a screen. So at that point, he made a little screen for her. And then she asked him to put her under a glass, because at night it got cold, and windy, and she didn't want to get too cold. So you'll see in the tarot deck that there's a rose under a glass dome. And that's how the little prince looked out for his flower at night. Put her under the glass dome there. And he learned to, despite all the goodwill of his love, he had soon come to mistrust her. He had certain inconsequential remarks and had grown very unhappy. I shouldn't have listened to her, he confided to me one day. You must never listen to flowers. You must look at them and smell them. Mine perfume my planet, but I didn't know how to enjoy that. The busyness about the tiger claws, instead of annoying me, ought to have moved me. He said, in those days, I didn't understand anything. So Little Prince is talking now that he's on planet Earth, and he's missing his flower, and he's saying, I wish I should have paid attention. I didn't understand. So in order to make his escape, because he was going to leave his planet and leave the flower behind, on the morning of his departure, he puts the planet in order. He raked out all the active volcanoes. The Little Prince possessed 2 active volcanoes, which were convenient for warming for breakfast, and he also possessed an extinct volcano. So I raked them all out, and then Little Prince uprooted one last baobab shoot. He believed he would never be coming back. But all these familiar tasks seemed very sweet to him in the last morning, and when he watered the flower one last time and put her under the glass, he felt like crying. Goodbye, he said to the flower, but she did not answer him. Goodbye, he repeated. The flower coughed, but not because she had a cold. I've been silly, she told him. I ask your forgiveness. Try to be happy. He was surprised that there was no reproaches. He stood there, quite bewildered, holding the glass bell in midair, failed to understand the calm sweetness. So, of course I love you, the flower told him. It was my fault. You never knew. It doesn't matter, but you were just as silly as I was. Try to be happy. Put the glass thing down. I don't want it anymore. And he said, but the wind, my cold isn't that bad. The night air will do me some good. I'm a flower. And he said, but the animals, I need to put up with 2 or 3 caterpillars if I want to get to know the butterflies, she said. So then he left the planet. So we're going to talk about that. So he leaves his planet behind. So the flower is like the Little Prince's girlfriend there. He has a little lover's tiff, and then they forgive each other, and then he leaves. So there you can see the little flower under the glass over there, and he's raking out the volcanoes and all that. All right, so then the Little Prince decides to leave the planet, and he visits some other planets. Before he gets to Earth, he visits some other planets. The first planet was inhabited by a king. And when he arrived at the planet, the king said, here's my subject. And the Little Prince wondered, how can he know who I am if he's never seen me before? And he didn't realize that for kings, the world is extremely simple. All men are his subjects. So then he talks to the king. The king likes commanding things, and it's a little tiny planet. There's nothing else on it. And so the Little Prince decides to move on. And at the very end, the king doesn't want to let him go, but what the king does is whatever you want to do, the king will command it right before you do it, so it'll look like he commanded it when you're going to do it anyways. So at the very end, he said, okay, what does he say? He was going to give the Little Prince all these titles. So he said, I'll make you a minister. And the Little Prince said, minister of what? And the king said, minister of justice. So that's important too, because in the tarot deck, the justice card is the Little Prince being the justice figure. So the king told him, you can pass judgment on yourself. Yeah, because the little prince said, "Why make me a minister of justice if there's no one to minister justice to?" And the king said, "You'll judge yourself." And then he says, "That's the hardest thing of all. It's much harder to judge yourself than judge others. If you succeed in judging yourself, it's because you are truly a wise man." Okay, so that was the first planet, the king. Now, all of these characters do show up in the tarot deck. So you get the king, and the next one is the vain man. Very vain man. And so when the prince went to visit his planet, the vain man said, "Ah, a visit from an admirer." So the vain man told him to clap his hands. And the vain man tipped his hat in acknowledgement. So there's the vain man. You can see him. He's got like a yellow suit and a hat. And he continued clapping, and the vain man continued tipping his hat. After 5 minutes of this exercise, little prince, tired of the games and monotony, said, "What would make the hat fall off?" And the vain man did not hear him. Vain men never hear anything but praise. And the vain man asked, "Do you admire me a great deal?" And the prince asked what admire means. And the vain man said, to admire is to acknowledge that I am the handsomest, best dressed, richest, and most intelligent man on the planet. And the little prince replied, "But you're the only man on the planet." And the vain man said, "Do me a favor, admire me all the same." And so after that, the little prince says, "Grown-ups are certainly very strange." So he continued on his journey. Okay, so then his third planet, he meets a drunkard. Which nowadays would probably be a drug addict, right? Meth head or whatever. But in those days, in the early 1900s, remember this author was born in 1900 and died in 1944. So in the early 1900s, mainly drunkards, right? So he goes to the next planet, the drunkard, and his drunkard says, "What are you doing here?" It said the drunkard who he found sunk in silence before a collection of empty bottles and a collection of full ones. "Drinking," replied the drunkard. "And why are you drinking?" And the drunkard said, "To forget." And the prince asked, "Forget what?" And the drunkard said, "To forget I'm ashamed." And the prince said, "Ashamed of what?" And the drunkard said, "Of drinking." And the prince was puzzled. "Grown-ups are certainly very strange," he said to himself, and he continued on his journey. So the next planet, he meets a businessman. And the businessman has a cigarette, and the prince says, "Your cigarette's gone out." And the businessman's counting. 3 and 2 makes 5, 5 and 7, 12, 12 and 3, 15. Hello, 15 and 7, 22, 22 and 6, 28. No time to light it again. 26 and 5, 31. Whew. That amounts to 501,622,731. And the little prince asked him, 500 million what? And the businessman said, "Oh, you're still here. I don't remember. I have so much work to do. I'm a serious man. I can't be bothered with trifles." And the businessman raised his head. "For 54 years, I've inhabited this planet, and I've been interrupted only 3 times. The first time was 22 years ago when I was interrupted by a beetle that had fallen onto my desk. And the second time was 11 years ago when I was interrupted by a fit of rheumatism. I don't get enough exercise. I haven't had time for strolls. I'm a serious person. And the third time is right now. Where was I? 501 million. Million what?" The businessman realized he had no hope of being left in peace. "Oh, those little things you sometimes see in the sky. Flies? No, the shiny things. Bees? No, the golden things that make lazy people daydream. Now I'm a serious person. I have no time for daydreaming." "Ah," said the prince, "you mean the stars?" "Yes, that's it, stars." So this businessman is counting all the stars. And the businessman owns the stars. And the little prince asked him, "What good does owning the stars do you?" And the businessman said, "It does the good of being rich." And the prince says, "What good does it do you to be rich? And the businessman said, it lets me buy other stars if someone discovers them. The little prince said to himself, this man argues a little bit like the drunkard. Nevertheless, he asked more questions. How can someone own the stars? To whom do they belong? Retorted the businessman. They belong to me because I thought of it first. And that's all it takes. So I manage them, I count them again. It's difficult work, but I'm a serious person. And the little prince said, well, if I own a scarf, I can wrap it around my neck and take it away. If I own a flower, I can pick it and take it away, but you can't pick the stars. The businessman said, no, but I can put them in the bank. He said, I write a number of my stars on a slip of paper, and I lock the slip of paper in a drawer. And that's enough. That's amusing, thought the prince, and even poetic, but not very serious. So, grown-ups are certainly quite extraordinary, said the prince, as he continued on his journey. So the next planet is the street lamplighter. So there's a man here, he lights the lamp every minute because it's a little planet and it spins around very quickly, so it's day and night very quickly. And so when the little prince on his planet, he said, good morning. Why have you just put out your lamp? Orders, said the lamplighter. Good morning. What orders are those? To put out my street lamp. Good evening. And he lit the lamp again. But why have you just lit the lamp again? Orders. I don't understand. There's nothing to understand. Orders are orders. Good morning. And he put out the lamp. Then he wiped his forehead. It's a terrible job I have. It used to be reasonable enough. I put the lamp out morning and lit it after dark. I had the rest of the day for my own affairs. But since then, things have changed. Year by year, the planet is turning faster and faster, and orders haven't changed. Which means now the planet revolves once a minute, and I don't have an instant's rest. I light my lamp and turn it out and turn it out every minute. So he never gets a break. And the prince liked him because he had something meaningful to do. He's the only one that didn't strike the prince as ridiculous, perhaps because he was thinking of something besides himself. So this little prince moved on to the next planet, 10 times bigger, this planet, and he meets a geographer. It's a geographer who, who explains to him that he keeps track of, and draws and keeps in his book all the cities and rivers and deserts. But he doesn't go out and describe them. He never leaves his study. But he receives the explorers there. He questions their memories from one of the explorers. And that makes him a good geographer. So, when the explorer's moral character seems to be a good one, the investigation is made into its discovery. So then the little prince asked him if he also included small things like he asked where the prince was from, and the prince said his planet he came from is not very interesting. It's small. He only has 3 volcanoes, 2 active and 1 extinct. And he also has a flower. And the geographer said, we don't record flowers. And the prince said, why not? It's the prettiest thing. And the geographer said, because flowers are ephemeral. And the prince said, what does ephemeral mean? geographies, the finest books, and the geographer replied, geographies are the finest books of all. They never go out of fashion. It's extremely rare for a mountain to change positions. Extremely rare for an ocean to be drained of its water. We write eternal things. So he kept asking him, he kept asking him, what does ephemeral mean? And the geographer replied, ephemeral means threatened by imminent disappearance. And the prince said, is my flower threatened by imminent disappearance? And the geographer said, of course. And the little prince said, my flower is ephemeral, he said to himself. She has only 4 thorns, which to defend herself against the world, and I've left her all alone where I live. That was his first impulse of regret, but he plucked up his courage again. Where would you advise me to visit? And the geographer told him to go to Earth. It has a good reputation. So the prince went away thinking about his flower. So then he arrived in Earth. That's where he met the pilot. But first, before he met the pilot, they talked about Earth a little bit, the number of kings, how splendid it looked. Saying men occupy very little space on Earth. You could crowd all humanity in the smallest Pacific islet. Grown-ups, of course, won't believe you. They're convinced that they take up much more room. They consider themselves as important as the baobabs. So you should advise them to make their own calculations. They love numbers and they'll enjoy it. But don't waste your time on this extra task. It's unnecessary, trust me. So once he reached Earth, the little prince was quite surprised not to see anyone. He was beginning to fear that he had come to the wrong planet. When a moon-colored loop uncoiled on the sand. Good evening, said the prince. Good evening, said the snake. Okay, so he met the snake first. And the snake is also in the tarot deck. And the prince asked him, what planet am I on? And the snake said, planet Earth in Africa. Oh, and there are no people on Earth. And the snake said, it's the desert here. There are no people in the desert. The Earth is very big. Little prince sat down on a rock and looked up in the sky. I wonder, he said, if the stars are lit up so that each of us can find his own someday. Look at my planet. It's just overhead, but so far away. It's lovely, said the snake. What have you come to Earth for? And the prince said, I'm having difficulties with a flower. Ah, said the snake, and they were both silent. Where are the people? The prince asked, resuming the conversation. It's a little lonely in the desert. And the snake said, it's also lonely with people. And the little prince looked at the snake for a long time. You're a funny creature, no thicker than a finger. But I'm more powerful than a king's finger, the snake said. The little prince smiled. You're not very powerful. You don't even have feet, and you couldn't travel very far. And the snake replied, now this is spooky, the snake said this. He wrote here. The snake said, I can take you further than a ship. He coiled around the little prince's ankle like a golden bracelet. Anything I touch, I send back to the land which he came. The snake went on, but you're innocent and you come from a star. The little prince made no reply. So the snake, now the very end of the story, the snake does send him back from the land where he came from. So, yeah. So then the snake goes on, the prince goes on. So that's him with talking to the snake there. That picture. So then he meets some flowers. So the prince moves on, and he encounters only one flower with 3 petals, a flower of no consequence. Good mornings to the prince. Good mornings to the flower. Where are the people? The flower had one day seen a caravan passing. But you never know when to find them. The wind blows them away. They have no roots, which hampers them a good deal. Goodbyes to the prince. Goodbyes to the flower. So the little prince climbed a high mountain. The only mountain he had ever known were the 3 volcanoes, which came up to his knee. And on his planet, he used extinct volcanoes as a footstool. But from a mountain as high as this one, he said to himself, I'll get a view of the whole planet and all the people on it. But he saw nothing but rocky peaks and sharp needles. Hello, he said, just in case. Hello, hello, the echo answered. Here he is on his mountain. So the little prince walked a long time. And he came across a rose garden, and he said, good morning. And the roses said, good morning. And the prince gazed at them. All of them looked like his flower. And he said, who are you? And the roses said, we're roses. Ah, said the prince. And he felt very unhappy. His flower had told him that she was the only one of her kind in the whole universe. And here were 5,000 of them, all just alike in just one garden. So there's him, the rose garden. She would be very annoyed, he said to himself, if she saw this. She would cough terribly and pretend to be dying to avoid being laughed at. I'd have to pretend to be nursing her, otherwise she'd really let herself die in order to humiliate me. So it's like a real relationship with him and his rose. Right? So, and then he said to himself, I thought I was rich because I had one flower, and all I own is an ordinary rose. That and my 3 volcanoes, which come up to my knee, one of which may be permanently extinct, doesn't make me much of a prince. And he lay down on the grass and wept. It was then that the fox appeared. Okay, so now he's the fox. So good morning to the prince. I'm here under the apple tree. Where are you? You're very pretty. I'm a fox, he said. Come and play with me. And the prince said, I'm feeling so sad. And, okay, come play with me, said the prince. I'm so sad. And the fox said, I can't play with you. I'm not tamed. And the prince said, excuse me, what does tamed mean? And the fox said, you're not from around here. What are you looking for? And the prince said, I'm looking for people. And what does tamed mean? People, said the fox, have guns and they hunt. Okay, so the fox talked about guns and being hunted. And there's a picture in the tarot deck of him being hunted by the fox being hunted. So the fox says, people have guns and they hunt. It's quite troublesome. And they also raise chickens. That's the only interesting thing about them. Are you looking for chickens? There's also chickens in the tarot deck too. The fox going after the chickens. Said, no, said the little prince, I'm looking for friends. What does tamed mean? It's something that's been too often neglected. It means to create ties. So he's saying tamed means to create ties. That's right, the fox said. For me, you're only a little boy, just like 100,000 other little boys. And I have no need of you, and you have no need of me either, for I'm only a fox like 100,000 other foxes. But if you tame me, we'll need each other. You'll be the only boy in the world for me, and I'll be the only fox in the world for you. And the little prince said, I'm beginning to understand. There's a flower. I think she's tamed me. Possibly, said the fox. On Earth, one sees all kinds of things. And he said, oh, it's not on Earth, said the prince. On another planet. He said, do you have chickens on your planet? And he said, no. And the fox said, well, nothing's perfect. The fox said, my life is monotonous. I hunt chickens. People hunt me. All chickens are just alike and all men are just alike. So I'm rather bored. But if you tame me, my life will be filled with sunshine. I'll know the sound of footsteps and will be different from the rest. So then he talks about the field. He said, look, there's a wheat field over there. For me, wheat is of no use. But you have the hair of gold. So little prince has golden hair. So it'd be wonderful once you tame me. The wheat, which is golden, will remind me of you. And I'll love the sound of the wind in the wheat. And then the fox started begging the little prince to tame him. And the prince said, I'd like to, but I haven't much time, and I have friends to find, and so many things to learn. And the fox said, the only thing you learn are things you tame. People haven't time to learn anything. They buy things ready-made in stores, but since there are no stores where you can buy friends, people no longer have friends. If you want a friend, tame me. And the prince asked him, what do I have to do? And the fox said, you have to be very patient. First, you have to sit down a little way from me over there, and I'll watch you out of the corner of my eye, and I won't say anything. And day by day, you'll be able to sit closer and closer. So, yes, telling him how to tame him. So that was how the little prince tamed the fox. And when the time to leave was near, the fox said, I shall weep. It's your own fault, the prince said. I never wanted you any harm, but you insisted I tame you. And the fox said, of course. But you're going to weep, said the little prince. Yes, of course, said the fox. Then you get nothing out of it. And the fox said, I got something because of the color of wheat. And so there's him with the fox. You'll understand that yours is the only rose in the world, then come back and say goodbye, and I'll make you the gift of a secret. So the little prince went to look at the roses again, and when he looked at the roses this time, he said, you're not at all like my rose. You're nothing like yet at all like my rose. No one has tamed you, and you haven't tamed anyone. You're the way of my fox was. He was just a fox like hundreds of thousands of others, but I've made him my friend, and now he's the only fox in the world. And the roses were humbled. You're lovely, but you're empty, he went on. I couldn't die for you. Of course, an ordinary passerby would think my rose looked just like you. But my rose, all on her own, is more important than all of you together, since she's the one I've watered, since she's the one I put under glass, since she's the one I sheltered behind a screen, since she's the one for whom I killed the caterpillars, since she's the one I listened to when she complained, or when she boasted, or even sometimes when she said nothing at all. She's my rose. And then he went back to the fox and said goodbye. And the fox said, here's my secret. It's quite simple. One sees clearly only with the heart. Anything essential is invisible to the eyes. Anything essential is invisible to the eyes, the little prince repeated. Yeah, it's the time you spent with your rose that makes your rose so important. So people have forgotten this truth, the fox said, but you mustn't forget it. You become responsible forever for what you've tamed. You're responsible for your rose. So then the prince went and met a railway switchman. So he's at a train station, I guess, or a train. So what do you do here? The prince asked, and the rail switchman said, I sort travelers into bundles of 1,000. And the switchman said, I dispatch the trains that carry them, sometimes to the right, sometimes to the left. And a brightly lit express train roared like thunder, shook the switchman's cabin. What a hurry they're in, the little prince. Where are they going? What are they looking for? Not even the engineer on the locomotive knows, the switchman said, and another brightly lit express train thundered by in the opposite direction. And the prince said, they're coming back already. And the switchman said, no, it's not the same one. It's an exchange. They weren't satisfied where they were, said the prince. And the switchman said, no one is ever satisfied where he is. And a third brightly lit express train thundered past. Are they chasing the first travelers? Asked the prince. No, they're not chasing anything, the switchman said. They're sleeping in there, or they're yawning. Only the children are pressing their noses against the window panes. Only the children know what they're looking for, said the little prince. They spend their time on a rag doll, and it becomes very important. If it's taken from them, they cry. All right, so next, you got about the trains and the switchmen. So there's a train, I believe, in the tarot deck too. So good morning to a sales clerk. So he meets a sales clerk now who sold pills invented to quench thirst. Swallow one a week and you no longer feel any need to drink. And the little prince asked, why do you sell these pills? because they save so much time, the sales clerk said. Experts have calculated that you can save 53 minutes a week. And what do you do with those 53 minutes? Whatever you like. If I had 53 minutes to spend as I'd like, I'd walk very slowly towards a water fountain. So next, on the 8th day, since this author, the writer here, says, since the 8th day since I crash landed in the desert, I listened to the story about the sales clerk, and I was drinking the last drop of my water supply. Ah, I said to the prince, your memories are very pleasant, but I haven't yet repaired my plane, and I have nothing left to drink. And I'll be glad to walk very slowly towards a water fountain. and the prince says, my friend the fox told me. And then the author says, little fellow, this has nothing to do with the fox. And the prince said, why? And the pilot said, because we're going to die of thirst. And the little prince didn't follow the reasoning and answered, it's good to have a friend even if you're going to die. Myself, I'm very glad to have had a fox for a friend. And the pilot's thinking, he doesn't realize the danger. He's never hungry or thirsty. A little sunlight is enough for him. And the little prince said, I'm thirsty too. Let's find a well. So they started walking. So they walked for several hours in silence until night and stars appeared. And the prince's words danced in his memory. So you're thirsty too, I asked, but he didn't answer the question. He merely said, water can also be good for the heart. I didn't understand his answer, but I said nothing. He was tired. He sat down. I sat down next to him. Stars are beautiful because of a flower you don't see. And I answered, yes, of course. And they said, the desert's beautiful. And so they walked and walked until they finally found a well. The little prince fell asleep, and he carried the little prince, picked him up in his arms and started walking. And then they found the well at daybreak. It said, the little prince said, people start out in express trains, but they no longer know what they're looking for. Then they get all excited and rush around in circles. It's not worth the trouble. And the well we had come to was not at all like the wells of Sahara. The wells of the Sahara are no more than holes dug in the sand. So there's the well they found. They hoisted the bucket to the edge of the well, set it with great care, and saw the sun glisten in the still trembling water. And he said, I'm thirsty for that water, the little prince. Let me drink some. And I raised the bucket to his lips, and he drank, eyes closed. It was as sweet as a feast. The water was more than merely a drink. It was born out of our walk beneath the stars and the song of the pulley and the effort of my arms. It did the heart good, like a present. So people where you live, the little prince said, grow 5,000 roses in the garden, and yet they don't find what they're looking for. And yet, what they're looking for could be found in a single rose or a little water. I had drunk the water. I could breathe easy now. And he said, you must keep a promise, said the little prince. And the pilot said, what promise? He said, a muzzle for my sheep. I'm responsible for this flower. So he took his drawings out of his pocket and drew him a muzzle. Okay. All right, so, and so he said, so I drew the muzzle, and with a heavy heart I handed to him and said, you've made plans I don't know about. But he didn't answer. He said, you know my fall to earth, tomorrow will be the anniversary. Then after a silence he continued, I landed very near here. Once again, without understanding why, I felt a strange grief. However, a question occurred to me, then it wasn't by accident that on the morning I met you 8 days ago, you were walking that way alone. So beside the well, there was an old stone wall, So he went away and the pilot went away and came back, and he caught sight of the little prince in the distance, sitting on top of the wall, legs dangling, and he heard him talking. And he heard him saying, "Don't you remember?" He was saying, "This is exactly the place." And another voice must have answered him, for he replied, "Oh yes, it's the right day, but this isn't the place." And I continued walking toward the wall. I could neither see nor hear anyone, yet the little prince answered again, "Of course, you'll see where my tracks begin on the sand. Just wait for me there. I'll be there tonight." It was 20 yards from the wall. I saw no one. When the little prince said, after a silence, "Your poison is good. Make sure it won't make me suffer long." So your poison is good. You're sure it won't make me suffer long. So the pilot's walking up and he's hearing the prince's conversation with the snake. But of course the pilot can't hear the snake responding. So there's he is talking to the snake, planning for his death that evening to go back to his planet. So the pilot said, "I stopped short and my heart pounding, but I didn't understand." "Now go away," the little prince said. "I want to get down from here." Then the pilot says, "Then I looked down towards the foot of the wall to have a great start. There, coiled in front of the little prince, was one of those yellow snakes that can kill you in 30 seconds. As I dug in my pocket for my revolver, I stepped back, but at the noise I made, the snake flowed over the sand and like a trickling fountain, and without even hurrying, slipped away between the stone and the faint metallic sound." So he didn't get a chance to shoot the snake. So he reached the wall in time to catch the little prince in his arms. His face was wet as snow. "What's going on here? You're talking to snakes now." And the little prince loosened his yellow scarf that he always wore, gazed a serious expression. He said, "I'm glad you found me. What was the matter with your engine? Now you'll..." So I'm glad that you found what was the matter with your engine. Now you'll be able to fly again. Okay, so at this point, before the pilot came back, he had fixed his engine so he could fly away again. So his plane was fixed. And the pilot says to him, "Well, how did you know?" "I was just coming to tell him that I had successfully fixed the plane." And the prince did not answer his question. All he said was, "I'm leaving today." And then sadly, "It's much further. It's much more difficult." So the pilot realized that something extraordinary was happening. He was holding him in his arms like a little child, yet it seemed to him he was dropping headlong into an abyss, and he could do nothing about it. "I have your sheep, and I have the crate for it and the muzzle," the prince said sadly. Once again, he felt chilled by the sense of something irreparable and realized he couldn't bear the thought of never hearing that laugh again, like a spring of fresh water in the desert. So he talks about the prince's laugh and going to the spot where the prince landed. So that night, I didn't see him leave. He got away without making a sound. When I managed to catch up to him, he was walking fast and with determination. Okay, but before this happened, he said, "It looks like I'm suffering. It looks like I'm..." Okay, so the prince is saying that he's leaving, and he says, "It'll look..." The little prince said, "It'll look as if I'm suffering. It'll look as if I'm dying. It'll look that way. Don't come to see that. It's not worth the trouble." He said, "I'm telling you this on account of the snake. He mustn't bite you. Snakes are very nasty sometimes. They bite just for fun." And but then the pilot said, "It's true, they don't have enough poison for a second bite." So the little prince was trying to sneak away to go get bit by the snake so he can go home to his land. So when he caught up with the prince said, "You were wrong to come. You'll suffer. I'll look as if I'm dead, and that won't be true." I said nothing. "You understand, it's too far. I can't take this body with me. It's too heavy." I said nothing. "But it'll be like an old abandoned shell. There's nothing sad about an old shell." And I said nothing. He was a little disheartened now, but he made one more effort. "It'll be nice, you know. I'll be looking at the stars too, and all the stars will be wells with a rusty pulley. All the stars will pour out water and let me drink. And I said nothing. So then he goes, so here's the place. Let me go alone. And he sat down because he was frightened. And he said, you know, my flower, I'm responsible for her, and she's so weak and so naive. She has 4 ridiculous thorns to defend herself against the world. So he sat down. And the pilot sat down too, and they hesitated a little longer. And the pilot said, there was nothing but a yellow flash close to the ankle, and he remained motionless for an instant. He didn't cry out. He fell gently, the way a tree falls, and there wasn't even a sound because of the sand. And that's it. So that's the last time he saw. So then he talks about the last chapter is just the pilot or the author saying that, you know, this was 6 years ago, and he never told the story before. And something extraordinary. Yeah, he thought about him and his flower and his sheep. He draws this picture and says, this is where it happened. So if you're ever in Africa, you can see that. That's the spot. See, the little prince comes back. So that's the whole story. So next we're going to look at the tarot deck and see how all these different things, characters and things show up on the deck. Okay, so now the deck, the little white book that comes with the deck, a lot of little white books are generic, but this one's not. The major arcana is generic. You know, it's got several different languages, but sometimes I'm just reading it real quick, but yeah. So when you get to the wands and everything, wands, cups, you know, swords, and everything, and pentacles, they all have unique descriptions that go just for these cards. So it's not generic. So, all right. So you start off with, now, there's the little princess, the Fool. So remember that box I told you he drew? I said, remember that box in the beginning. So there's the box that he drew, the Fool card, and there's the little prince with his yellow scarf. So he flies off of his planet, and there's his rose down there, right? So then the High Priestess, the Magician card, you've got the little prince with the fox, the snake, the sheep, and his rose there in a cup. So you see the fox is with the swords, the rose is the cups, the snake is the wands, and the sheep is the coins. Are the coins. So there you have, you know, a plane, someone falling off a plane there, I guess the pilot, and there's the High Priestess that looks like the little prince with the rose and the sheep there. Roses around. Now, they have female characters for some of them, and there's no female characters in the cards. There's no women in it, so you have the Empress there, you have a woman there, they don't say. Now, okay, so now we get to the Emperor. You have the King there, kind of the Emperor there. All right, so now this one, the Hierophant, is someone writing there. Now there's the pilot and the little prince, and they seem to be looking at, that could be the businessman character. Now this one always threw me, that the lovers were the little prince with a rose, because I didn't know the story, that they were like a couple talking to each other, and the rose is like symbolic of his girlfriend. So there he is, there's the lovers. So once you read the story, then it makes sense. Chariot, the prince traveling around with the birds. Strength, taming his friend there, the fox. The Hermit, looking at the planets. The Wheel. Justice, he's the Justice, little prince. So the Hangman, little prince hanging off the plane. And the Death card showing the snake that just bit him in the ankle, and the rose and the stars there, going back to his flower there. Temperance, when they're at the well, getting the water there. Now in the Devil card, you've got all the characters. You've got the King, the Drunkard, the Vain Man, and the Businessman there. You see the Devil's controlling them all. The tower, the pilot, and the prince falling down off the plane. And the star is really pretty. It's got the snake and the fox staring up at the sky, at the planet where the little prince came from. And then here at the moon, you have the prince on his little planet with his flower in the glass, casement that he made, and he's doing shadow hands in the moon. And the sun is the prince looking at his multiple sunsets that he looks at with his flower there. And then again with Judgment, you have the characters again that you met in the book, the drunkard, the king, vain man, and the businessman. Of course, the little prince with the fox. And the world, you've got the sheep, the snake, the flower, and the fox. And in the middle is the little prince on his planet there. So the cups is the flower, his flower there, with the caterpillars there and the butterflies around. So 2 of cups when he's giving water to his flower there, and a volcano in the background. 3 of cups are him and the fox and the man at the pilot at the well, and they found the well. 4 of cups, his flower again, that he takes care of, and covered the glass to protect it. 5 of cups is the sad little prince missing his flower. In the field there, that's the field where he met the fox there, the wheat field. There he is, 6 of cups. Now this is, again, so this that picture again that he drew. I don't know if you can see it, that's in the book. This is the box that the pilot drew for the prince. And you see roses and the fox there. So they keep showing that box picture from the book. 7 of cups, the pilot flying off, different cups there. And then 8 of cups is the prince walking off, and that the face here I think is the pilot here, and the prince is walking away. And then 9 of cups is the prince with all his roses there. Sitting on a wall there against a wall. 10 of cups is the prince with his flower and the sheep and the fox. A good time. So then you got Page of Cups, Knight of Cups, which looks like a pilot. You got Queen and King of Cups. And there's no women in it, but there's Queen. They put a queen. They added a woman there, and the king looks like the little prince. All right, so now I get to the wands, and so you get the snake. Right, so you got a green. In this drawing, you got a green snake, even though in the story it was a yellow snake. So the 2 of wands is him and the snake. 3 of wands, raking his volcano there, cooking there. 4 of wands, he's playing the flute with the fox there, this fox friend. 5 of wands, the little prince is on the wall, and there's the snake down there, and there's the pilot there, about to attack the snake. And again, the snake here is greenish color, but it was yellow in the story. So 6 of wands, he fixed his plane finally as the pilot, and there's a little prince on top of the plane. Okay, so the 7 of wands is the lamplighter that had to light the lamp every minute. So that's his character there in the 7 of wands. Now the 8 of wands, they made up some characters here. They have like a woman that's dressed Indian woman, a Japanese woman, an Eskimo, and I don't know, I think this looks Russian, I think, or I'm not sure, some of these other costumes, but they're tribal or traditional. They're all lighting a lamp together. But from this story that I have, this version of the story, these characters are not in it. I don't know if there's a longer version of The Little Prince that includes these, but it's not in this story that I saw. So I don't know. They just made up these characters, I think, for this card. Unless there's a longer version of the story I'm missing. But then you got 9 of wands, this little prince looking up the sky, thinking of his flower in the sky there. Okay, 10 of wands, they have the snake biting his ankle, like on the last page of the book before he dies and goes back to his planet. So they put that in 10 of wands. I would have put that in 10 of swords, but whatever, it's 10 of wands. So now we got the train. In the page of wands, you get the train when he was seeing the trains going back and forth. And you get the Knight of Wands with the lamp post there. The lamp lighter there. Now the Queen of Wands, she has 2 snakes on either side. And the King of Wands has a king cobra snake in front of him. That looks like the king that was on the planet that he visited. And there's little elephants in the background there drawn on his throne. Okay, so next we have the swords, and we get the foxes with the swords. So Ace of Swords, 2 of Swords, him and the fox, the little prince and the fox. 3 of Swords, him missing his flower, so he's got his flower there. Right, Four of Swords, the fox spoke about how all humans are hunters coming after him, hunting him. They're all the same to him. So there's the fox hiding from the hunter. Five of Swords, now you have the fox hunting a chicken here. So you got a chicken here and two men over here. Their backs to the backs of two men there. And he's chasing the chicken there for Five of Swords. Six of Swords, you see the pilot walking towards the well, carrying the little prince on his back. So that's when they walk to the well. The Seven of Swords is the little prince with the fox. The Eight of Swords is the prince on top of the wall with the fox and the snake at the bottom of the wall. And he's talking to the snake that the pilot hears. Nine of Swords. Okay, so Nine of Swords goes back to the drunkard that he met on that planet who was drunk. So Nine of Swords is like this drunk man who's unhappy, miserable. Now, Ten of Swords, I'm going to look this one up. So there's also a description for each card. I mean, I don't have time to read every description for every card, but there's a good description. So if a card is really not making sense, what they drew. This one's a little confusing to me because you got 10 swords in the middle, and then you get the little prince up here with the fox hugging the fox. And there's baobab trees around this. So what's happening here is right. I remember now. The baobab trees engulf the planet and begin to crack and break apart, sometimes the point of exhaustion. There is no choice but to let go and give ourselves up completely, resigning ourselves to the fact that through crisis comes strength. Carl Jung states, quote, "It is from need and distress that new forms of existence arise, and not from idealistic requirements or mere wishes." That is the essence of the Ten of Swords. Yeah. So, and then, yeah, so I'll leave that. So then last one, oh, not there yet. Page of Swords, looks like the prince again, it looks like. Knight of Swords, the fox being hunted there. Queen of Swords, the book. King of Swords with the fox looking happy. All right, so the last one are the Pentacles. Again, the sheep that he wanted to bring on his planet that the pilot drew for him. Look at the sheep. Okay, so Two of Pentacles is, you can see the pilot and the prince, and he's got that drawing of the snake that ate the elephant that looks like a hat. He's holding his hand there, the author. And then here's the pilot. This is the first story in the book where he's drawing the snake that has eaten the elephant there. So there's Three of Pentacles there showing his drawing. And then the Four of Pentacles is the businessman that the little prince met on the planet where he's counting all the stars and said he owns them because he thought of it first. So there's the businessman with the Four of Pentacles. He's very greedy, right? Those are my stars. Five of Pentacles. Now that going back to the pilot and the prince that are very thirsty. They're dying of thirst and they're going towards the well there. Going towards the water. They need the water. Six of Pentacles is the pilot drawing the sheep for him and giving it to the little prince over here. Seven of Pentacles here. You have the prince, little prince with a shovel here, looking around all the gold coins and the baobab tree. The Eight of Pentacles, you can see, is a little prince with his flower, the rose there, and he's watering him. You got a watering can, there's 3 volcanoes, so he's sitting on his planet, taking care of the flower. The Nine of Pentacles is back to the prince sitting on the wall with all the roses around him and his sheep. 10 of Pentacles, you got the pilot and the little prince with the plane that's working again. Okay, so the Page of Pentacles looks like the very vain man with his hat. He tips his hat. So Page of Pentacles is the very vain man. And you get the Knight of Pentacles, which looks like the little prince there, it looks like. But he's got a pipe in his mouth, so I don't know where that came from. Now the Queen of Pentacles, I don't know, that's not a character in the book. And the King of Pentacles. So that is it. So that is the story and the cards, gorgeous cards for the Little Prince. So I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.